The night air in South Sacramento on March 15, 1992 was cool, holding the last whispers of winter. It was a Sunday, a day that should have ended with quiet preparation for the week ahead. But for two families, the Harrises and the Pottses, the night would not end in peace. It would end in a storm of violence that would steal a life and shatter many others. Patricia Harris, a mother of four, would not see the sunrise. Her death was not a random act. It was the culmination of rising tensions, of neighborhood disputes that had festered and grown into something far more dangerous. It was a story born from the streets, a tragedy that would become a landmark case in Sacramento's long and difficult struggle with gang violence. This was not just a story about a crime, it was a story about a community caught in the crossfire. It was about young men who saw their identities through the lens of their neighborhood affiliation, where respect was a currency often paid for with aggression. The groups involved were not formally recognized gangs in the way the city might define them, but they were crews nonetheless. They were young men from the 24th Street Garden Block Crips and their rivals from Meadowview. The animosity between them was a low hum in the background of their daily lives, a constant potential for conflict that needed only a small spark to ignite into a raging fire. That spark would come unexpectedly at a local gas station. Patricia Harris was not a part of this world. She was a mother, a caregiver, a woman who worked hard to provide for her family. She was 42 years old, a pillar in her household. Her home on Fonda Avenue was supposed to be a sanctuary, a safe place for her children, a refuge from the dangers that lurked outside. But on that March night, the dangers did not stay outside. They came knocking at her door, bringing with them a wave of terror that would sweep through the house and leave behind an emptiness that could never be filled. The events that led to this moment were a chain reaction, a series of poor decisions and escalating anger that pulled Patricia into a conflict that was never hers. The story of Patricia Harris's death became more than a local news headline. It resonated through the city, a stark reminder of the human cost of street warfare. It raised difficult questions about justice, about responsibility, and about the very nature of art and expression. When a local rapper's lyrics were brought into the courtroom as evidence, the case forced the community to look at the lives of the young men involved, not just as perpetrators, but as products of an environment that offered few ways out. It was a tragedy with many layers, each one revealing a deeper truth about the challenges facing Sacramento and cities like it across the country. The echoes of that night still linger, a somber lesson in loss and a call for change. The trouble began, as it often does, over something small. It started with a look, a gesture, a perceived sign of disrespect at a 7-Eleven gas station. James Mann Brown, a member of the 24th Street Garden Block Crips, was there with his friends. They were just living their lives, moving through their day. At another pump were members of a rival Meadowview group. In the charged atmosphere of neighborhood rivalries, even a simple glance can be misinterpreted, seen as a challenge. Words were exchanged. The tension, always simmering just below the surface, began to boil. It was a classic street confrontation, a test of wills where backing down was seen as a sign of weakness, an invitation for future trouble. The argument escalated quickly. Threats were made. The air grew thick with hostility. This was not a disagreement between individuals. It was a clash of affiliations. Each young man felt the weight of his crew's reputation on his shoulders. To them, this was not just about personal pride. It was about defending their territory, their identity. The verbal sparring was a prelude, a warning of what could come next. The encounter at the gas station ended without physical violence, but the conflict was far from over. The fuse had been lit. The anger and humiliation felt by Brown and his friends would not simply dissipate into the night air, it would be carried away, nurtured and allowed to grow. Leaving the gas station, Brown's group felt they had to respond. The code of the street demanded it. An insult left unanswered was a sign of weakness, and weakness was a vulnerability they could not afford. They drove away not with relief, but with a sense of purpose. They needed to regroup to plan their retaliation. The initial slight had now morphed into a mission. They felt their honor had been challenged, and in their world, honor had to be restored through action. The desire for retribution began to take shape, pulling them down a path from which there would be no easy return. The decision was made to escalate the conflict from words to violence. The target was identified, the home of the rival crew members. They believed they knew where their antagonists lived. The plan was simple and brutal. They would go to the house, confront them, and settle the score. There was no discussion of consequences, no thought given to the innocent people who might be caught in the middle. The focus was singular, driven by a potent mix of anger, pride, and youthful impulsivity. The small fire that started at the gas station was now being fanned into a blaze, and they were heading to a place where they could pour gasoline on it. The stage was being set for a tragedy, one that would unfold in the supposed safety of a family home. The next stop for James Brown and his crew was the apartment of a friend, Michael Griffin. This was their staging ground, the place where anger would be forged into a concrete plan of attack. The atmosphere in the apartment was tense, charged with the energy of imminent violence. More members of the 24th Street crew gathered, their numbers swelling. Among them was Unraveling Brown, a local rapper who went by the stage name X-Raided. He was James Brown's cousin. The conversation was not about peace or de-escalation, it was about retaliation. They talked about what had happened at the gas station, rehashing the insults, stoking the flames of their collective anger until it burned hot and bright. Inside Griffin's apartment, the talk turned to weapons. This was the point of no return. The introduction of firearms transformed the plan from a potential fistfight into a mission with deadly potential. A .357 Magnum revolver was produced. A shotgun was also present. The weapons were passed around, examined, and assigned. The presence of the guns changed the dynamic in the room, adding a heavy, metallic finality to their intentions. They were no longer just a group of angry young men. They were an armed party preparing for an assault. Each person who agreed to go, who picked up a weapon, was making a choice that would have irreversible consequences. The plan was solidified. They would drive to the house on Fonda Avenue, the home of the Potts family, where they believed the rivals from the gas station lived. They would confront them there. The objective was clear in their minds: to instill fear, to assert their dominance, to deliver a message that the 24th Street garden block Crips were not to be disrespected. The group, now numbering at least 5, piled into a car. Griffin X-Raided Brown was among them. They were a unit bound together by a shared purpose and a collective rage that drowned out any individual voices of caution or doubt that might have existed. As they drove through the dark Sacramento streets, the mood in the car was a cocktail of adrenaline and anticipation. They were on their way to deliver street justice. There was little thought given to the possibility that their information was wrong, or that innocent people might be inside the house. Their focus was narrowed, tunnel-visioned on the target. They were a force of anger rolling through the quiet neighborhood, heading toward a home where a family was settling in for the night, completely unaware of the violence that was about to break down their door and shatter their lives forever. The car carried them closer and closer to a moment that would be etched in infamy. The car pulled up to the house on Fonda Avenue. The night was quiet. Inside, the Potts family was going about their evening. Patricia Harris was there visiting her daughter, who lived at the home with her own children. They were not the people from the gas station. The intelligence that had fueled the mission was flawed, a fatal mistake. The young men who exited the car and approached the house did not know this. They were acting on bad information, their anger directed at a household of innocent people. They believed they were confronting their enemies. In reality, they were about to terrorize a family. James Brown, armed with the .357 Magnum, led the way. Another member of the crew, carrying the shotgun, was with him. They pounded on the door, their arrival an abrupt and violent intrusion into the peace of the evening. When the door was opened, they forced their way inside. The scene that followed was one of chaos and terror. The family was caught completely by surprise, their home violated by armed intruders. The men demanded to see the people they were looking for, shouting the names of their rivals. The family, confused and terrified, had no idea what they were talking about. Patricia Harris, seeing her family threatened, reacted as a mother would. She tried to protect them. She moved to intervene, to shield her loved ones from the intruders. In the confusion and panic of the home invasion, a struggle ensued. James Brown, holding the revolver, was at the center of it. The situation was volatile, a powder keg of fear and aggression. And then a shot rang out. The sound of the gunshot ripped through the small house, a deafening crack that signaled the moment everything changed. Patricia Harris was hit. She fell to the floor, mortally wounded by a single bullet. The shot shocked everyone, including the intruders. The invasion, meant to be an act of intimidation, had turned deadly. Panic replaced aggression. The young men, their mission having spiraled into a homicide, fled the scene. They left behind a scene of unimaginable horror, a dying woman on the floor, a traumatized family, and a home that would never again feel safe. They had come seeking to settle a score with rivals who were not there, and in their blind rage they had taken the life of an innocent woman. The tragic irony was devastating. Patricia Harris died defending her family from a danger she had no part in creating. The sirens that sliced through the night on Fonda Avenue were a mournful announcement of the tragedy that had occurred. Police and paramedics arrived to a scene of profound grief and chaos. But it was just too late for Patricia Harris. She was pronounced dead, her life stolen in a senseless act of violence. Her death sent a shockwave not just through her family, but through the entire South Sacramento community. It was a stark and brutal illustration of the consequences of gang-related conflict, a reminder that the violence often claimed victims who had nothing to do with the disputes that fueled it. The news spread quickly, a story of a mother killed in her own home, a narrative that horrified the city. For the Harris and Potts families, the aftermath was a nightmare from which they could not wake. They were left to navigate a world fractured by loss. They had to plan a funeral for a beloved mother and grandmother. They had to explain to children what had happened, how their sanctuary had been so violently breached. The trauma of that night would linger, a permanent scar on their lives. The community rallied around them, offering support and sharing in their grief. But nothing could fill the void left by Patricia's absence. Her death became a symbol of the innocence lost to the streets, a rallying cry for those who were tired of the bloodshed. The Sacramento Police Department launched an intensive investigation. The crime was high profile and the pressure to find those responsible was immense. Detectives began piecing together the events of the night, starting with the initial confrontation at the 7-Eleven. They interviewed witnesses, followed leads, and slowly began to identify the members of the 24th Street crew who had been involved. The names of James Brown, Michael Griffin, and Unraveling Brown, also known as X-Raided, soon emerged as key suspects. The net began to close around them, the consequences of their actions catching up with them. The arrest brought a sense of relief to some in the community, but honestly, they also highlighted the cycle of violence that continued to plague the city's youth. The young men who were taken into custody were products of their environment, caught in a system of loyalty and retaliation that had led them to this tragic end. Their futures, once filled with potential, were now defined by a single catastrophic decision. The community was left to grapple with complex feelings, anger at the perpetrators, sorrow for the victim, and a deep-seated fear that without meaningful change, tragedies like this would happen again. The death of Patricia Harris was a wound on the soul of Sacramento. Anna Ray Brown's involvement took the case in a unique and controversial direction. As the rapper X-Raided, he had recently recorded an album titled Psychoactive. The album was raw, aggressive, and filled with violent imagery, a style known as horrorcore rap. The lyrics described street life, confrontations, and acts of violence with graphic detail. For prosecutors, the album was more than just music. It was a potential confession. They saw a direct link between the lyrics on the album and the real-life crime that had taken Patricia Harris's life. They decided to use his artistic work against him in court, a move that would spark a national debate. During the trial, prosecutors played X-Raided's music for the jury. They pointed to specific lyrics that seemed to mirror the events of March 15th. They argued that the songs were not just fictional stories, but a blueprint for, or even a boastful account of, the murder. The prosecution presented the album as a diary of a killer, a window into Anna Ray Brown's mindset and intentions. The strategy was powerful. It painted him as a man who not only participated in a violent crime, but also chronicled it in his art. The music, with its dark and brutal narrative, became a character witness against its creator. The defense, along with many free speech advocates, argued that this was a dangerous misinterpretation of artistic expression. They contended that rap music, like other art forms such as movies or novels, often deals with fictional themes and exaggerated realities. An artist, they argued, should not be convicted based on the content of their creative work. They asserted that X-Raided was playing a character, telling stories about the harsh realities of the world he saw around him, not providing a literal account of his own actions. The trial became a flashpoint in the culture wars, pitting artistic freedom against prosecutorial strategy. Ultimately, the jury was swayed by the prosecution's case. While Anna Ray Brown was not the triggerman, his presence at the scene and the perceived connection between his lyrics and the crime were enough for a conviction. He was found guilty of first-degree murder along with his co-defendants. The use of his album as evidence set a chilling precedent. It raised fundamental questions about where the line is drawn between art and reality, and whether creative works can be used to prove criminal intent. The case of X-Raided became a landmark example of the legal and ethical complexities that arise when the worlds of hip-hop and the criminal justice system collide. James Brown, the man who fired the fatal shot, was convicted of first-degree murder. The court sentenced him to a long term in prison, a punishment that reflected the gravity of his crime. He entered the California state prison system as a young man, his life outside the walls now a distant memory. The world he knew, the streets of Sacramento, was replaced by the stark, regimented reality of incarceration. The years began to pass, each one a testament to the life that was lost and the lives that were irrevocably altered by the events of that night. Prison was meant to be a place of punishment, but for some it can also become a place of profound and unexpected change. Inside the confines of prison, away from the influences of the street, James Brown began a long and difficult journey of self-reflection. The weight of what he had done was a constant companion. He had taken a mother from her children, a life from the world, and he had to live with that knowledge every day. He started to confront the choices he had made, the anger that had driven him, and the culture of violence that he had been a part of. It was a slow and painful process of untangling the person he had been from the person he wanted to become. He began to seek out opportunities for growth and education that were available within the prison system. Brown dedicated himself to change. He participated in rehabilitation programs, seeking to understand the root causes of his behavior. He renounced his gang affiliation, a significant step that required immense courage in the often dangerous environment of prison. He began to see a different path for himself, one that was not defined by violence and retaliation, but by accountability and the desire to make amends. He worked to educate himself, to develop new skills, and to build a new identity, one that was separate from the street persona he had once embodied. His transformation was not for show. It was a deep, internal shift born from years of remorse and introspection. After serving 26 years of his sentence, James Brown was granted parole in 2018. The parole board saw a man who was profoundly different from the angry youth who had entered prison decades earlier. They saw a man who had taken full responsibility for his actions, who had demonstrated a sincere commitment to change, and who was dedicated to preventing others from making the same mistakes he had. His release was not the end of his journey, but the beginning of a new, challenging chapter, re-entering a world that had changed dramatically and trying to build a life of purpose after causing so much pain. Returning to society after 26 years in prison was like stepping onto a different planet for James Brown. The world he had left behind in 1992 was gone, replaced by a society that was faster, more technologically advanced, and in many ways more complex. He had to learn how to navigate a world of smartphones, the internet and social media, things that were the stuff of science fiction when he was first incarcerated. The challenges of re-entry were immense. He had to find housing, secure employment, and rebuild relationships with a family that had grown and changed in his absence. Every day presented a new hurdle, a new test of his resolve. But James Brown did not face these challenges alone, and he was not content with simply fading into the background. He was driven by a powerful sense of purpose to honor the memory of Patricia Harris by dedicating his life to preventing others from following his destructive path. He connected with community organizations in Sacramento that were focused on youth outreach and gang intervention. He had a story to tell, a powerful and tragic one, and he believed that sharing it could make a difference. He began speaking to at-risk youth, visiting schools and community centers, and sharing his personal journey from gang member to convicted murderer to advocate for peace. His message was direct and unflinching. He spoke about the illusion of glory in street life, the emptiness of retaliation, and the devastating, far-reaching consequences of violence. He did not make excuses for his past. Instead, he owned it completely, using his own story as a cautionary tale. He told the young people he met about Patricia Harris, about the family he had destroyed, and about the decades he had spent in a cell, haunted by his actions. His authenticity and deep remorse resonated with many of the youth, who saw in him not just a former convict but a credible messenger who understood their world and the pressures they faced. Today, James Brown is a respected figure in Sacramento's anti-violence community. He works tirelessly as a mentor and interventionist, helping young men and women find alternatives to gang life. He has transformed his life from one that took from the community to one that gives back to it in a profound way. His work is a living testament to the possibility of redemption and the power of personal transformation. It is a difficult and often thankless job, but it is his penance and his purpose. His life, reclaimed from the wreckage of his past, is now dedicated to ensuring that there are no more tragic tales like the one that unfolded on that dark Sacramento night in 1992. The story of Patricia Harris is more than just a true crime narrative. It is a profound lesson about the interconnectedness of a community. Her death was not an isolated incident, but the tragic result of a chain of events rooted in poverty, a lack of opportunity, and a street culture that glorified violence as a solution to conflict. The echoes of the gunshot that ended her life reverberate to this day, reminding us that the ripples of violence spread far beyond the immediate victim, touching families, neighborhoods, and the entire city. It underscores the urgent need to address the root causes of gang violence, not just react to its symptoms. The case also forces us to confront difficult questions about justice and rehabilitation. The long prison sentences served by James Brown and his co-defendants satisfied a societal demand for punishment. Yet, Brown's transformation highlights the immense potential for change that exists even in those who have committed the most serious of crimes. It suggests that our justice system must be about more than just warehousing individuals. It must also provide meaningful pathways to rehabilitation. Supporting programs that help incarcerated individuals confront their past, gain education, and develop new skills is not a sign of weakness, but a wise investment in public safety and human potential. Furthermore, the story emphasizes the critical importance of community-based support systems for those leaving gangs and returning from prison. The journey out of a life of violence is perilous, and the transition back into society is fraught with obstacles. Organizations that provide mentorship, job training, and a sense of belonging are essential lifelines. They offer a positive alternative to the pull of the streets, helping individuals like James Brown build new, productive lives. Investing in these programs is a proactive strategy to break the cycle of violence and recidivism, creating safer communities for everyone too. Ultimately, the tragic tale of Patricia Harris is a call to action. It calls on us to remember the human cost of every act of violence. It calls on us to support the difficult work of intervention and prevention. It calls on us to believe in the capacity for change and to build a society that offers more pathways to hope than to despair. The memory of Patricia Harris is honored not just by mourning her loss, but by working to create a community where such a senseless tragedy can never happen again. Her story is a Sacramento story, but its lessons on empathy, accountability, and the power of redemption are universal.